Okay.
Right.
Right.
The interviewer is Christian Wright. Today is November 5th, 2020, and we're in the ADUC at the Eagle Diversity Center. And
Eagle Diversity Education Center.
And if you could please introduce yourself.
My name is, I don't know if I should say Dr. Cory Clark. My name is Dr. Cory Clark. I am currently the Assistant Director of the Eagle Diversity Education Center here at Morehead State University. So that's, is anything else I need to include in that?
No, you're good.
I'm sorry. I mean, asking questions while this is going.
That's fine. And do you live in Morehead or the surrounding area?
I do. I live in, I don't know if we consider Clearfield Morehead, but I live in Clearfield, so I do live locally.
And how long have you worked at the university?
I've worked at the university since 2015.
And when did you first hear about COVID? And when you heard about it, just kind of what were you thinking?
It was I think I first heard of it early in kind of February. I think early on. I think I want to say my memory is kind of spotty, but very early early in the year, more so like February, Marchish. I think I want to say close around that time. Because our annual conference is in April, so maybe February, Marchish, and what was the second part of that question?
Just what'd you think about it?
It was just, honestly, it was kind of one of those things where it was like, yeah, all right, it's like, yeah, but then of course, a lot of times with media and things of that nature, you'd be very skeptical about how things are magnified sometimes, and so being very mindful, but then as, just kind of like, yeah, it was kind of like, yeah. Okay, but then as time goes and it's like, okay, this is really, really serious, and things started to kind of shut down or things started to change in terms of how we would approach different things. So that was kind of the first instance. It kind of started off like, what's that thing? And then started to do a little bit more research, and then realize how much misinformation is out there as it pertains to what it is, and so just doing my due diligence and doing that research. But then as time progressed, the kind of the seriousness progressed alongside of it.
Yeah, I definitely started off with this thing. I was like, it'll be like swine flu. It'll be fine.
And maybe to add to that answer, it was personally, it was kind of like I was sick in January, so it was kind of like I think I had it then. And It was like, well, maybe I won't be affected. But it's also in general, I'm very lax about those kind of things. It was kind of like, all right, until it hits my doorstep, and then it kind of becomes a little bit more serious. And so kind of that same approach.
And about late March last year, we shut down campus for students during spring break and moved to online instruction. How did that affect you and your job?
Well, immediately, first thing we did was able to do was because I run a center, so this is a place where a lot of people from different backgrounds, different race, ethnicities come. Just have a lot of general students that come in here on a daily basis. So impactful for me, it was the first thing I had to do was shut it down. Just kind of following and a lot of times with the Division of Student Affairs, trying to make sure that I follow lockstep and what leadership has demonstrated what we can and cannot do. But a lot of those services just really moved everything online. So it was able to do one-on-one meetings with students virtually. But the primary piece, because I think everybody kind of got sent home, and moving a lot of my services online, doing one-on-one meetings. But the impact here, we really, I guess we'll get to that point as we talk about today and the impact of it today. But moving a lot of my stuff online, and so just really trying to stay connected with students and making sure that they were staying on top of their work, because the dynamic at home is very different. Yeah. The environment is different, and so being sure to keep students motivated and keep them encouraged, and letting them know, that I'm still here for them, and so trying to do that virtually. But it worked out. COVID was kind of the gift and the curse for me as well, because it allowed us to kind of realize some of the things we were able to do online, and allowed me to kind of have some personal time and just kind of as terrible as it was impacting the world. I was writing for my doctoral work, and it was just good to be at home, and just but it was good personally because it allowed being able to take care of myself personally allowed me to be there a little bit more for my students as well, and just realize just letting them know, stay motivated, stay on top of it. I know this environment's different. Try to keep a schedule. Try to emulate a lot of the things you were doing here back home. And although I do understand it can be a little different, having to babysit the kids or having to try to go to work if you could, trying to make money and just so on and so forth. So they were just shifting everything that we do in person, kind of online, outside of actually having people in the center. That was a long answer.
It's fine. So I feel like we get the good information from.
Yeah, so it's gonna be a machine gun talker. So it's
yeah. And when did you teach any classes at that time?
At the time, no. I usually do a fall first year seminar course. So at the time, I wasn't teaching any courses, but I oversee the DREAMS program, which stands for Dedicated to Retention, Education, and Academic Success at Morehead State, which is a comprehensive mentoring and leadership program that targets underrepresented minority students with the goal of improving retention. And so we do a lot of workshops. So we do a lot of in-person workshops. I have the freshmen where we do a lot of transition stuff. So I moved a lot of that stuff online. The sophomore leadership program, I move a lot of those workshops online. And so a lot of things we would typically do in person, just moving those workshops and programs onto an online format.
And how did that benefit or draw down?
Well, the attendance went down big time.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it just comes from, just like I said, just being in that different environment. Because when students are here, they're here and they're fully engaged in the college experience, and you're in the residence halls, and a lot of the family and outside home distractions don't necessarily impact you as much as you would, because like when you're here, you're completely immersed in the college life, and then back home you're still having to give that same energy, but that different type of environment where you get up and it's like all you're doing all day is going to class, I'm studying, and everything's related to your collegiate experience academically, socially, personally. But then back home, you're trying to pick up that environment, take it home, and then put it in a format that you may not necessarily be keen to, as it relates to online learning, and having to teach yourself. And sometimes it's that different dynamic of staying engaged, and some people are better learners in person. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of that challenge of trying to recreate that environment that's a little can have a multitude of variables that impact how you go about your day.
And how did your department have to adapt to the changes that COVID required?
For me, it was, I guess, looking at it today, the big piece is so a lot of the things that we do, we could do online, but it's for the population that I work with, community means so much. And that's why this space of the Equal Diversity Education Center, it not being, and I'll just take you to where we are today, is that this is a hub and that safe space for students of different backgrounds. I have students from all different walks of life in the center. But when we are talking about a predominantly white institution where a great number, we only account for less than, maybe less than 8% from what I remember, underrepresented minority students, don't quote me on it. But when we're a minority population, and so that sense of belonging, a lot of those issues that are traditionally experienced by students of color or underrepresented minority students at a predominantly white institution sometimes, and so it kind of magnifies when you don't have that space, because this is a space where a lot of students can come and be themselves. This is a space where they can come and find those connections and find their people and those support groups and those student organizations, and that connection or that sense of belonging that's so essential to student retention. So when we take away that space, right, and so sometimes it can be harder, because this space can be the difference between a student being retained and a student going home, because social isolation and alienation is one of those common challenges that students face. And so with this center being closed, and this is one of my fears for our first year students, is that they're not getting that sense of community, or that sense of belonging as they transition from a new space to a different environment. So it's really I believe our students a great deal, because even in my numbers in the DREAMS, because we're having to change things. So with the DREAMS program, it's kind of that premier retention strategy of my office. And so with having to change how we go about orientation and doing things online, changes how we were able to recruit students and bring them into this program so that to give them that support to be successful. And so my numbers are down, which means there's probably a lot less students who may not know about the Dreams program and how that can impact their retention, one, from the Dreams program, but then also those students who may not be in the Dreams program, but just know that, hey, there's that one place in Ada where I know a lot of people that kind of look like me are, and or if I want to learn about different groups of people and just mix with people, it's just the vibes are good because students can come in and study, they can play Uno, and so it's just a hodgepodge of just different ways to give students that sense of belonging and really help with those connections academically and socially for our students that can really impact retention.
And then you already hit on it a little bit, but moving through the summer and coming into this semester, how did that kind of your planning go? And then when you finally knew we were going to be able to open?
Impacted big time. Again, like I mentioned, with the Dreams program targeting underrepresented minority students, that recruitment piece, my numbers are down in terms of the overall total number of students, participants for first year students. But not just that, waiting to see what those guidelines are like, because not just that, for when we're talking about programming, a lot of my programs, I do some campus-wide programming as it relates to diversity and inclusion, multiculturalism, awareness, and education. Sometimes, I mean, most of my programs, campus-wide programs, are big programs. So if we can't gather, it makes it hard to kind of prepare and plan when these are staple programs of the office and you're waiting to see, can I have more than 6 people at this event? Is it not more than 10? Which then it kind of impacts your planning, and then you have to ask yourself, can every event translate to an online version? And not everything can. So, for example, in the fall, I have this Hispanic, in celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month, I do a fiesta every year. Food, music, dance, right? And it's a huge program. I partner with some of our faculty in the Spanish department, our Latino Student Union. This is a big program for our campus and the community. And so it's like, can I have that? Well, I can't really have to be able to work within the guidelines from, the governor, but also within the institution. And so you're waiting to see, okay, can I do this? And you have to decide, or you know what? No, maybe let me try something, do something else. Well, can I recreate that in an online version? Not necessarily, because it's about culture, food, and music, which you can do other things, but that specifically. So it was hard to prepare for the semester, not really knowing how those guidelines were going to change or how they can impact how we do our job.
And do you feel more prepared for next semester now? Or do you think there's going to be some challenges?
Yeah, I think you get a better idea of what that looks like than we probably did before. Understanding that things aren't going to change. So how can we go up? How can we be creative about the programs that we have? And part of you also kind of hopes that things are going to change. And so you kind of hold off a little bit to wait to see, well, maybe things will change and maybe we can do in-person programming and maybe some of those, maybe those guidelines will still be around, but maybe change a little bit. So maybe instead of 10, we can have 30, but if it's outdoors, right? And these different variables that we may have to consider. So part of me is kind of like hoping that it changes because there's things that I like to do. And I think the students are getting burned out, like with this online programming. I believe that they're just zoomed out from class, from the different events, from meetings. And so I think that can, so you don't want to overwhelm them, because I can just tell from attendance that students are just like, I'm so tired of being online, and it's kind of, so it does impact how we prepare. And so, but now that we know, you have that framework to work within and trying to find a way to be creative.
So how has the pandemic changed how you use technology? I know you've already
on
that
I think how it's changed how I use technology is that I think it made me recognize ways that we may be able to substitute some certain things and utilize it to our advantage. So, like, for example, one-on-one success meetings or, academic and just success coaching and one-on-one meetings that I have with students, offering online a virtual option. We all have access to WebEx, and so giving students that opportunity, that option to just simply meet online. But it also, I think, the accessibility has to, us, sometimes we have commuter students that may not necessarily be able to make it, or schedule-wise is tough, and so being able to just prop up your phone and have a meeting where you are can really, I think, for me, how it can impact that those points of contact and just that accessibility. I think technology has been really useful in that way. And maybe, it's it. Not everything can translate online, but I think there is some benefits to utilizing technology in what we do. So.
And how have you kind of had to navigate not only state and federal rules with COVID, but also the universities?
Repeat that question one more time.
How have you had to navigate federal, state, and some of the universities' rules with COVID?
I think one of the I think the big piece has always been communication and getting access to the information. I think one of the things that I found that with our leadership in the state level, I think really set the tone for how we move as an institution and also within our division. So being able to lean on those guidelines from the governor and staying within those realms, and so utilizing that to devise the way our policies are and create that sense of consistency can help with how to navigate it. But I think for me personally, it's always been the communication and how we can do it, because sometimes decisions are being made and not being necessarily being shared. So as we try to prepare and plan, and granted too, they may not have that information, but we're just kind of looking for that. But I think that's been the hardest piece, is being able to say, well, what can I do? What can I do? Well, they say we can do that. Well, but I think here they've really been strictly following what the governor's been saying and utilizing that as the foundation for how they make decisions and guide how they make decisions. And so it's really just, but if that information being communicated down to everybody else, and I think that's kind of been that. I think early on was the challenge, and I think as per usual, this is something that's new, so we get better with time. I think as an institution that we've gotten better at time at being transparent about those decisions and sharing that information with people, so that allows us to be able to do our jobs, because we're sitting here waiting and trying to figure out how can we do it within the parameters and the guidelines of what we can and cannot do. So but being respectful, understanding how serious it is, and it's being taking it seriously. So. And
do you find that people have made enough information available to you so you can make good decisions with COVID?
Early on, I don't think so, but I think as time progressed, indeed, I think Andy has been doing a great job. I mean, early on, particularly, I think nowadays, with the pressures of the economy and things of that nature, I think there's a lot of pressure on. But I think early on, just being able to communicate, and like I said, it's kind of been the timeline has been kind of like, right. Early on, it's like, right. And then as time goes, and then now we're having these, daily press conferences that we have to here in the state of Kentucky, just being able to go in and looking at those and getting that information, that real time information and data. And I think it's not just from the state. I think the leadership from the governor and the state has kind of helped our colleges and institutions, but everybody's values are different, and so I do believe that that as time progresses, we've gotten better about that information. And then once you realize, like anything, you got to do your own research as well. Yeah. And so once things start to kind of be like, oh, this is kind of serious. Let me kind of dive into it a little bit, making sure, kind of fact checking some of that misinformation, just to make sure I understand how it works and how it goes. Okay. So I think that was the answer to the question.
Pretty good one. And kind of looking into the future with the U.S. itself topping, yesterday I think we hit 100,000 cases for the first time, and we've been hovering around that for about a week, and Brown County itself is in the red. How does that affect your planning, and kind of what's your best case and worst case scenario, so how you can see this turning out, how it relates to you and the university?
I think the best case is that, because I think, like I said, COVID, it's here. It's going to happen. People are going to be exposed to it. People are going to have it. But just making sure that we be vigilant about what we do and how we do on an individual level. And I think, like I said, if we took that same energy that we had in April and March, May, right, and that same energy isn't being applied today, because I guess as time goes, we got kind of lax, and you start to kind of get back into that normal, to some degree, that the normality of your life, and realizing, and I think now people are kind of like, whoa, I need to get back to where I was back then. But I think the best case scenario is that we're able to finish out the semester, keep the cases low. vice president, understanding that those cases have gone up, they've given us the freedom to kind of work from home if need be. And so working on a case-to-case basis and saying whatever you're comfortable with, feel free to do that. And so for me, best case, none of our students get sick, or the cases go down and we're able to finish out the semester and students can get that well-deserved break that they need. The worst case is that it picks up and it starts to, it gets to the point we only have a few weeks left, and how it can really, really impact us and impact graduation. But remember the question, I make sure I'm answering it correctly.
Just how do you, with the cases being so high right now, how do you,
how does
that affect your planning?
And so that is kind of just, for at least for this office and planning wise, is understanding we're going to be in the same situation next semester. So that understanding that it's not going to be, you would like for it to be a little different, but knowing, like, for example, for me, it's like students are burned out with the Zooms and onlines. And so when you're trying to take an event and having it and doing it online, some students just feel like it's another class. And it's kind of like, and I may not even show up. And if I do show up, I'm not going to be engaged. I'm just literally cutting my camera on. And so one of the things I did this year was I did a hike. So it was something that we've never done. So just trying to be creative and find ways of that nature to get people out, but be safe in a way that we can still practice social distancing and do these activities, understanding how critical they are to the students for all students really, but particularly with the students that I work with, and understanding how that can really make a difference in their collegiate experience. And so trying to find ways to be creative in that, more creative like that, versus trying to recreate these programs in a virtual format, understanding what our students are going through. So that kind of informs my planning about how I go about doing things. So, but individually, it's getting back to the basics. I think individually, we got to get back to making sure that we, get back to that mindset we were in April and May, where you're like really, really vigilant about what you're doing and how you're going. Now, and people is like, yeah, it is what it is, and the cases, the numbers reflect that.
And if you don't mind me asking, how has COVID affected you and your family?
It's impacted us. I think we haven't had any deaths in our family, but I do have a couple of people in my family that have contracted the virus. More importantly, like just recently, I think more recently than not, I went home a couple of weeks back, so it's always kind of been that I've been, that fear, that knowing a person who's been exposed and possibly being in the same area as them, but more so it hasn't really impacted us as much until recently. We have family that had a kind of that same energy of like, well, let's have a party, all right? And one of my cousins ended up having COVID-19, and not just that. Of course, I wasn't there because I was here. My family lives in Louisville. But not just that, my mother was there. She's, very vigilant about how she does. But I guess that day she was like, let me go to this birthday party. And, normally she doesn't do handshakes and cuffs. But my cousin kind of like, popped up on her, gave her a hug. And so, and then the next day wrote like, hey, I have COVID. I've been positive. I've been diagnosed with, with a positive case. And so understanding that like my had direct contact with my mother. So you immediately go into, right, the fear mode, and you're just kind of being afraid. But not just that, my mother is an essential worker, so just the exposure. And one of the things that when we talk about the disparities, my mother's hearing impaired, so she's deaf as well. She's deaf, so making sure that sometimes information, even though they do have the interpreter on there to make sure, but if you're not there to catch that with that language, sometimes information doesn't always funnel down a lot of times. So even in how you understand it, even how my mother would understand something, it could be from a basic, surface level. And so explaining to my mother that, hey, you've been exposed to COVID-19. You can't go to work. And so it's like, well, who's gonna do this, or who's gonna cook this, and well, you can't. But then also understanding, well, if you don't work, you don't get paid. And we've got rent to cover, and you're in a house by yourself, and so on and so forth. So that economic piece of being essential and working and so on and so forth. And so that to me it impacted me more so my mother's health, but more so economically the impact that they can have being away from work for 2 weeks, and how they can impact rent and the things that you want to got going on. And so that personally, outside of everybody else in my family being at that party with the positive case, so personally, it's kind of that's been the biggest one for me.
And is there anything else you'd like to talk about, Ed?
Nah, outside of that, I mean, I think we got a little bit of that, and I just think COVID-19 and but also the disparities within the different. One of the primary reasons that I didn't, of course, follow within the regulations within the university kind of impact the decision not to open, but understanding how COVID-19 impacts our communities of underrepresented communities for racial and ethnic minorities a little different, and so knowing what that could be like, because they could be in that same situation of me understanding how important this is and how students flood to this space, but then being in a cesspool for COVID. I mean, not a cesspool, but a pool for COVID-19 and how it impacts our communities like specifically with healthcare, access to healthcare, the economic piece of it, being able to work and rent, and not necessarily having some of those things, the suspending rent and the healthcare and all these different disparities that it impacts our communities a lot differently. So I didn't want to be that person who, understanding how valuable this is, but really giving the student, all it takes is one person, and then how that impacts other people's families and having insurance and pre-existing conditions, and how the access to some of those stuff and how they can lead to the greater deaths in our community because of those disparities, from the systemic marginalization of certain communities. But how it hits us hits a little different. And so understanding that component of it and realizing that this is a space where typically underrepresented minority students hang, and how it can impact them, not just them and their families as well, being that the disparities within the different communities economically, socially, and healthcare wise. And just so that was kind of the big piece for one of the primary reasons outside of what the guidelines. So the guidelines help big time. But so outside of that, man, that's all I got.
Thank you for your time.
I appreciate you, big dog.